Good evening, everybody. How are we tonight? Hopefully I've got the camera set up in the right position. Yeah, that should be fine. So tonight I'm going to be doing a tutorial, okay? And it's going to be on 3 movements. I've been asked a number of times now, and so has Kelly, if I could go through doing some technique work on an RDL, a deadlift and a squat. Give you some coaching points and give you some cues that you want to be looking for, okay? And how to execute the movements with as close to perfect form as you possibly can, okay? So I'm going to run through a few different protocols regarding the movements and things you really want to be looking out for if you're going to be doing it yourself as a movement or if you're going to be coaching it yourself, okay? So don't worry, you don't need to get warmed up, and I'm not going to be doing any, big extravagant warm up. I'm simply just going to be demonstrating these movements, ladies, so you can just replicate these in your own time. If you want to do it alongside me, that's absolutely great. There wasn't going to be a huge amount of warm up necessary, really, because you won't be doing it with a huge amount of weight, and there's no ballistic movement involved, and there's no plyometric movements involved. Okay, so first of all, it makes sense to start with this first movement, which is the hip hinge RDL. Okay, so the hip hinge, the RDL movement, which is effectively the decreasing of the angle between the lumbar and the femur. This movement here is a hip hinge. Okay. The hip hinge is a fantastic movement, and it rotates around the axis that goes through the pelvis, okay? So the only joint, effectively speaking, that we're concerned with here is decreasing that angle between the torso and the upper legs, okay? A hip hinge is this. A hip hinge is this. A hip hinge is also this. It doesn't matter whether you're in a kneeling, a crouching, or a standing position. The hip hinge is still a hip hinge, okay? I'm going to show you the first movement with the barbell, okay, of the RDL. So just a few coaching points regarding the actual hip hinge and the RDL itself. What I want you to try and imagine when you're standing in this position is you can be shoulder width, you can be slightly narrower than shoulder width, it really doesn't matter. Try and make sure them toes are pointing nice and forward. The key here is we want the knees to stay in position. We don't really ideally want our knees to be tracking over our toes, okay? We want to keep our spine lovely and long, nice neutral spine. We want to brace our core, and we want to imagine that we are rotating around this axis, okay? So if we just take a bow, that is effectively what we're looking for when we're doing a hip hinge, okay? With the exception, we're going to have a bar in our hands now, okay? So this is going to slightly change the sort of constraints we're moving in when we have a barbell, okay? So I've approached the barbell. I've now collected the barbell and I'm in this upright position, okay? The things I'm thinking in my head are, I want to keep my knees in a nice fixed position. I want to contract my glutes, okay? That's going to activate and switch on that posterior chain. I'm going to be bracing my core, keeping my chest upright, and I'm going to hinge forward. Now, the way in which the bar moves away from the body is up for debate. If you want to keep the bar in contact with the body, that's fine. If you want to let the bar escape the body, that's also fine, because what's going to happen is the bar is only going to travel vertical, okay? In an RDL, the bar is only ever going to travel vertical because we're not putting any force on it going anywhere but in a vertical path, okay? So we have nice soft knees, okay? You can have a slight bend if you need to. If you want to take a little bit of stress out of the lower back, of course, you can bend the knees. I always opt for a slight knee bend. I contract my glutes, drive back, and I hinge. Notice my position here, ladies. My spine is neutral. I squeeze, and I come to upright position. That is an RDL. If I take away the barbell, you'll notice nothing has changed in this position, except I've just picked up a weight. So I come down, come to this position. You shouldn't be feeling any stress through your lower back. Switch those glutes on. Switch those powerhouse muscles on. They're really going to help you out here, okay? Fantastic posterior exercise, especially for working the hamstrings, the glutes, lower back, mid back, and even into the upper back. It's all contracted, okay? So nice and strong, arms lovely and long, core braced, chest high, hinge forward, and contract. You don't need to go down to this position here. That is massively going to compromise your lower back. Take it from somebody that has herniated a disc in the past, okay? please do not put too much force through your lower back. This exercise is effective just moving through such a small range of movement. If you see any of my videos where I'm doing any deadlifts or I'm doing any RDLs, I'm not moving my lower back for a huge range of movement, okay? I'm keeping that tension on, keeping that core brace, keeping my spine lovely and neutral, and offsetting as much of that stress from my lower back into my core, my glutes, and my hamstrings, okay? So now we're going to move on to the deadlift. The deadlift is a combination of the RDL with also breaking at the hips and knee flexion, okay? So multi-jointed movement, it's a functional movement, and it's an A to B movement, okay? So in this position, the only difference with the deadlift is once we have finished initiating that hip hinge, we actually break at the hips and come down. But notice that my line of travel that I'm moving through, my spine is still in a neutral position, my chest is still upright. The only thing that's changed is as I've descended, I've brought my knees into it. So if I bring the bar back, okay, teaching cues are feet shoulder width, hands outside of the thighs, arms lovely and long, okay? Same teaching cues, brace the core, chest high, spine neutral, with the exception of I'm going to hinge forward and then I'm going to allow my hips to break. What do I mean by that? I mean I'm going to allow my hips to articulate, okay? My femoral head inside my labrum is going to articulate. Some people will naturally take a more narrow stance. Some people will more naturally take a wider stance, okay? It is completely up to you. There is no one sort of foot stance fits all. You can sort of stand wherever you want as long as you're allowing optimal articulation of the hip, you're allowing optimal knee flexion, you're keeping your spine in a neutral position and braced, limiting the amount of forward flexion, and you're maintaining the integrity of the movement itself. So if we return back to this deadlift position, okay, we're going to hinge and we're going to drop. We're going to drive and we're going to return to an upright position. That effectively is your deadlift, ladies, okay? So the things to take away from this are the RDL is massively, massively going to challenge the glutes, is massively going to challenge the hamstrings and also the upper posterior. When we bring the deadlift into it, the deadlift, lifting from the dead floor up, a deadlift, it means the bar is coming to a complete stop. It's a dead weight. The difference is we allow leg drive, okay? So we're incorporating our big muscles such as our quads, even some calf activation, okay? It's an entire body workout doing a deadlift. Every muscle in the body will quite possibly be contracted as you pull through. And of course, when you start increasing the weight. What I want you to understand is that you don't need to lift excessive amounts of weight when you deadlift, okay? You can do it for repetitions. It's a fantastic movement and it has such a huge crossover into everyday life for your functional movements, just being able to pick things up off the floor and having confidence in being in this position and driving through, okay? The strength you're going to develop from the deadlift is transferable into everyday life, okay? We really should drill this movement pattern, make sure you really perfect it, and try and see if you can really lock in that RDL with the knee flexion and the breaking of the hips, the articulation of the hips, maintaining that structured integrity through the spine, core braced, chest nice and high, and fixing your gaze on, you can fix your gaze on the wall, you can fix your gaze on a point, try and keep that neck nice neutral alignment, okay? So we're going to move on to the squat. Now, I know most people on here can absolutely squat perfectly fine. And the bottom position of a squat very much mirrors the start position of a deadlift, i.e. you're going to be in this full depth squat here, okay, with the exception of the knees will now track out over the toes. That's absolutely fine, okay? You're still going to have your chest upright, nice neutral spine, core braced, except the barbell will be behind the back of the neck, and you're going to squat down, okay? There is effectively no conscious hinging in a squat. You simply will break at the hips first. When you're squatting, okay, and you're trying to perform a squat as best you can, always remember to break at the hips first. So you're pushing those glutes back, allowing optimal articulation of the hip, okay? This should also allow you to keep your spine in the neutral position and really complete the exercise in a nice manner, okay? So I'm going to lift the barbell up, I'm going to take the barbell, pass it onto the back of my neck. I'm now going to perform this squat, okay, with the barbell on the back. Now, a few noticeable mentions in this position. You can opt to have the barbell sat high on the traps. This is called high bar squatting, okay? You can also opt to have the barbell below the traps, sitting more across the rear delts and across the top of the scapula. This is going to be low bar squatting. A few worthy mentions are high bar squatting, personally, I feel is safer, okay? Secondly, low bar squatting is naturally going to take you into more of a forward hinge position, just simply because of the nature of, if you watch my position, I'm going to try and show you as best I possibly can. Here, if I drop to low bar, watch straight away what happens for me to have to hit depth. Okay? I naturally go into, not forward flexion, I naturally will hinge more further forward to achieve optimal depth. My advice is stick with high bar squatting, okay? And you have more control over the bar as well. So I'm going to take a nice wide stance, okay? I always opt for a nice wide stance. Just test the knees are working okay. Yeah, they're all good, they're primed, they're ready. Chest is nice and high, ladies. Spine is neutral. I inhale, I brace the core, okay? I now begin to drive my glutes back, articulate through the hips, and I'm here, hitting optimal depth. Notice the position of my spine is lovely and neutral, okay? My elbows, my forearms have stayed nice and punchy in the sky, and I'm going to drive nice and vertical, okay? Again, a few mentions. The bar travel in a deadlift, the bar travel in an RDL, the bar travel in a squat is vertical. If you was to put a laser on the end of your barbell, you want that barbell to be traveling as close to straight as possible. We don't want any of this squiggly, we don't want any, clashing off the shins, we don't want any sort of like regular shapes being formed with the bar. They're just simply a nice straight bar path. Before you do any sort of like RDLs, deadlifts, squats, really drill that movement pattern in your head, okay? And get it reinforced in your head that you're going to be able to execute these movements properly. Go for precision over speed, okay? Get that exercise nailed and get it boxed off, because what's going to happen is you're going to be able to have more progress going forward. If you initially start lifting with bad technique, it's going to catch you out. You're going to make progress and then it's going to come back to haunt you. I would much rather see clients, participants, athletes that I'm working with scaling it back and working back to the barbell and getting their fundamental basics bang on. And this is all going to come around keeping that neutral spine, keeping the core braced. Very important for protecting that lower back. Driving back with the glutes, okay? Allowing the articulation at the hip to be optimal and optimal knee flexion. What happens is when something goes wrong in the kinetic chain, whether it be the ankles, knees, hips, and upwards, it has a knock-on effect somewhere else. So make sure you've done a nice bit of mobility before you go into any kind of heavy compound lifts. Make sure that you can perform these movements without any weight on your back. Can you achieve optimal squat depth before you put a barbell on your back? Okay? Can you achieve a deadlift before you start initiating pulling any weight off the ground? Have you mastered the hip hinge before you start trying to load up, slowing down weight that is trying to escape to the floor before gravity takes hold? Can you actually do the hip hinge? This tutorial is just simply to give you an overview of how you can stay safe, how you can take a few of these ideas that I give you and use these as teaching cues when you're instructing anyone how to do a squat, a deadlift, and an RDL, and have fun with it. You know, they're safe movements done correctly. If you can keep that spine nice and straight, nice and strong, and you can achieve optimal articulation through the hips and the knees, you'll have absolutely no problems using these exercises that are going to benefit you. They're powerhouse movements. They're so important. You've got your functional movements such as your deadlift, your squat. You've also got your overhead as well, you know, which would be typically like a military press. Okay, these are functional movements. And what we mean by that is they have a crossover into everyday life. They have a function, okay? we have to squat down. We have to deadlift things off the floor, not necessarily with a barbell, but we do have to pick things off the floor. We have to put things on the top shelf, okay? So these have a massive crossover into everyday life. And I absolutely promise you, if you spend the time getting your deadlift, your squat, your RDL, and your overhead lifts perfect, you will make significant gains. You will make huge strength gains, and you will be a much more capable, stronger human, okay? If there's any other lifts going forward that you'd like me to cover, I'm happy to come back on here and talk about any lifts that you'd like me to go through, give you some teaching points for, and just even if you just wanted to see me do the movements so you can know that you're sort of there or thereabouts, or, yeah, Jace, I've got it, bang on, I've got it perfect. And, you know, this was for a lot of people that have asked about RDLs, a lot of people that want to know they've got their squat technique right before they go heavier, which is good. And the fact that people are reaching out saying, look, I want to increase my weight, but I want to make sure that I'm actually doing this right before I do, because I don't want to get injured, is brilliant. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help coach you to achieve your next level. So I hope this has been beneficial to you. And if there's any more help you need, give me a shout. Thanks, everybody.